Okay, now let's go back to this story. Investigations are ongoing in the baffling circumstances surrounding Thabo Bester's alleged death. Trade Union Federation Cosatu is the latest this afternoon to weigh in on this matter. It's calling on government to come clean on what really happened. Let's speak now to the Deputy Parliamentary Coordinator of Cosatu, Tony Ehrenreich. Tony, good afternoon. Welcome to today and thank you very much for your time. So I guess Cosatu, like other players in the country, you are completely disturbed by this news of Thabo Bester's alleged escape from the Mangaung prison.
Thank you very much for inviting us. Of course, we're disturbed, but we're not surprised because the level of corruption in our country at all levels is really of concern to everybody in the country, and that must be responded to as a matter of urgency. If we both got to restore the confidence of people in the government, but also ensure that our country has the stability that's a requirement for being able to move forward. What we've seen here is the bad choices of government coming home to roost, with a private prison just showing what they're in business for. Private prisons are in business to make money. So if somebody was corrupt and incarcerated and they have connections and money from outside, they're going to be able to buy their way out of those privatized prisons. This is why Cosatu insists that public institutions and the public good must be served by public organizations and not by private organizations that are just set up to make money out of the mishaps of our country and the mishaps of our people. We're outraged at what has happened, and we ask the government to investigate, get to the bottom of it, and find those responsible and make sure that the full might of the law is applied to them.
Yeah, among several points you make in your hard-hitting statement, Tony, as Cosatu, is that the state has sold out the integrity and morality in exchange for the maximization of profits.
Well, absolutely. Why is it that prisons must be privatized? What we want is those incarcerated who pose a threat to the society and who needs a structured environment for rehabilitation, for the prison service and correctional service to exercise that mandate, not by a private institution whose only intention is to profitize. Like somebody like Thabo, who clearly is a criminal with vast networks, probably reaching right into the highest levels of political connections also, that prisoners like that must be kept incarcerated and away from where they can wreak havoc on the society as a whole. But we want to find out who was responsible, the levels of corruption that clearly must have preceded this, and then we want the state to take a decision that's in line with the promises that we made our people. And that is that state institutions will look after the public interest and not privatized institutions which are just intent on making money. And if they can make money out of releasing somebody from prison, then they will do that also.
Yeah, Tony, you also call on government. You say you reiterate your call, which means you must have made it earlier as well, for the government to cut ties with this company that's responsible for this prison, because you say also the company is linked to the apartheid wall, to the Israeli taxpayers' money, and also has supplied equipment to Israeli prisons, and you feel that the government is acting against its own values.
Well, absolutely. Clearly, as a South African society, we stand by the Palestinian people. We also stand for a culture of human rights, and we've just celebrated Human Rights Day in our country less than a week ago. So those public value parameters that we set for our politicians to operate in, those must be upheld. And so if a prison and an organization like this, who supports the apartheid practices of the Israeli state and their border posts and their prisons and their institutions that wreak havoc on the lives of Palestinians, there should be no place for companies like that in South Africa. They should be excluded by virtue of the fact that they support the apartheid state of Israel in upholding the oppressive regime and oppressive environment on the Palestinian people. So there should be no place for a company like that in South Africa, but it seems that those involved with what is happening in prisons, and prisons have been a hotbed of corruption. If we look at what Cosatu has done, and we've seen what's happening now, clearly there are systemic issues of corruption there that the state, the democratic state, the outcomes of the Zondo Commission must be urgently investigated and must be at the maximum sentences applied to those guilty of it. But we now need to see the state act with decisiveness and act in the interest of our people, with public institutions, not with private institutions who have no interest in the long-term development and prospects of the South African society, but just want to corrupt our politicians, as we've seen through Bosasa, and those involved in the Bosasa scandal are yet to be brought to account. This is not only those directly in corrupt relations with Bosasa and GS4, but also those who seem to be benefited from these institutions and benefited from the private prisons. We must stop these practices that are just a hotbed for corruption, and we must ensure that public institutions guard the public interest and the public purse.
Okay, as we conclude, Tony, if you may, very briefly, you've made the point that you want government to explain how this happened and how it's going to be prevented from recurring, but you also believe that there's no space for private involvement in the prisons. So how, for example, would you see as Cosatu, or suggest as Cosatu, security to be handled in our prisons?
Well, we have corrections officers. We have the correctional officers. We have a public institution. We have a Ministry of Correctional Services. They must ensure that the public values that are meant to be applied in incarceration, so that we ensure that corrective measures are applied to prisoners, but also that those who pose a threat to society are kept incarcerated for the duration of their prison sentences. Clearly, these private companies are both unable to do it, but also unwilling to do it because they can be bought off at the earliest opportunity by those who have money, or they can be buying those who have political oversight of these institutions, like we've seen with Bosasa and others. So we want the state to withdraw its involvement in any corrupt activities. We want them to end the privatization of prisons and many other institutions that are responsible for looking after the public good, so that we can ensure that services are not price sensitive, but that they are need sensitive, what our people need and what we must roll up as a state in line with our promises that we made to the electorate. And the government must uphold those obligations.
Thank you very much for your time this afternoon. Cosatu's Deputy Parliamentary Coordinator, Tony Ehrenreich, weighing in there on the Thabo Bester saga.